Forests have been, are, and will continue to be vital to human existence. They've provided us with wood with which we build our homes and cook our food. They clean our water and supply much of the oxygen we breathe. We find spiritual solace in the awesome splendor of a forest. Even the fossil fuels that drive our modern economies are the legacy of ancient forests. This utilitarian view of forests' value is an anthropocentric one, but we can also take a more biocentric view that argues for the intrinsic value of the non-human world. Forests have direct value to humans through the goods many people consume from them for subsistence and through the many products derived from them. Hundreds of millions of people, including many indigenous peoples and ethnic minority groups, depend directly on forests for subsistence. They build their houses from forest trees, gather fuel wood for heating and cooking, and eat forest game, fish, and fruits. Palms are some of the most important trees to humans living in tropical forests. Their leaves are used for thatch, their wood for construction and weaponry, their fiber for hammocks, bags, and fishing line, and their fruit for food and lamp oil. At least 2 billion people, mostly in developing countries, still rely on fuel wood for cooking and heating. Calculating the dollar value of subsistence use of forests, or the so-called consumptive value of forest products, is done by estimating the price people would have to pay if they purchased the equivalent of these products on the market. Well above and beyond subsistence use, modern societies produce many goods from forest resources that are bought and sold in markets. The productive value of forests is the dollar value of such products. Timber, medicines, plant oils and resins, and rattan are a few examples. Many of the products derived from forests have their origins in traditional knowledge. Rubber, palm oil, and our beloved chocolate and coffee are all forest plants, traditionally used by indigenous peoples that have made their way into modern society. Depending on the source, the total direct value of forests is estimated in the hundreds of billions to trillions of dollars per year. It's difficult to estimate, but world trade in timber products alone, including sawn wood and paper products, is around $120 billion. In the U.S., forest products represent around 4.5% of GDP. As human population increases, demand for timber is growing, and risks exceeding natural forests' capacity to supply it under conventional extraction methods. Of far larger value to humans than the direct values we've just discussed, forests provide myriad indirect values. Indirect value includes non-consumptive uses that forests provide, often combined under the umbrella of ecosystem services. Common examples of ecosystem services are pollination, water purification, maintenance of soil fertility, climate regulation, coastal protection, and recreation. A less obvious example of indirect value of ecosystems is option value, or the long-term value of some future, unforeseen use, such as an as-yet undiscovered gene that in the future may provide crop resistance to some emerging pest. Some countries have recognized the potential value of their genetic resources and have put in place laws to control bioprospecting, in which outsiders collect genetic material for profit-driven research purposes. While bioprospecting can and has led to the discovery of important medicines, the financial benefits of such discoveries tend to fall into the hands of a wealthy few, leaving unrecognized the knowledge of the indigenous people or the country that worked to protect those resources. It is much harder to place a dollar value on indirect values of ecosystems compared to direct ones. For example, what's the value of fresh water? Some would say it's infinite, because without it, human life would cease to exist. In virtually all modern economies, in particular capitalist ones, the services provided by nature are neither bought nor sold and have long been considered external to the market and free for all to use. Because ecosystem services have traditionally been treated as common property, free for all to use, they are susceptible to the tragedy of the commons. An idea popularized by Garrett Hardin, the tragedy of the commons recognized that individuals acting independently and rationally according to their own self-interest may behave contrary to the best interests of the whole group. It was originally observed on communal grazing lands, where each farmer was motivated to put too many livestock on the land, at the expense of everyone. It's also seen each time a factory emits toxic chemicals into the air. It may enhance their profits to do so, but the cost of dirty air is borne by all of us. This is the concept of negative externalities, where all the costs of production, the cost to society or public health in this case, aren't incorporated into the price of the product. The degradation of common resources has led to attempts to calculate the substitution or restoration value of these resources. If we pollute our air, how much would it cost to substitute it with a different source of clean air, or restore it back to clean air? There's been a lot of progress over the past decade in valuating ecosystem services using this and other methods. Let's look at some examples. Having a sufficient supply of clean water is one of the most important challenges facing humanity in the 21st century. In New York, the need for water was recognized early, and in the late 1980s, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Safe Water Drinking Act required steps to ensure a long-term, pure water supply for the people. One way to obtain this clean water was to treat wastewater back to drinking water at a cost of around $9 billion. Another alternative was to protect the 150,000 acres of upland forest in the city's watershed that supplied natural, clean drinking water, at a cost of only $1.5 billion. If that forest had been cut down, the first option would have been the only one, so the substitution value of that forest was $9 billion. Clearly, the best choice was to protect the forest, and that's exactly what the city did. Today, the New York Watershed Protection Plan ensures clean drinking water for more than 9 million consumers in the state. Other areas of the U.S. and the world have followed suit. In Quito, Ecuador, for example, the Municipal Water Agency is securing protection of critical watersheds through land purchase and landowner agreements, thereby avoiding the much more costly need for filtration. Another compelling example of the value of ecosystem services from forests is found in the coastal protection provided by mangroves and other coastal forests. In 2004, a devastating tsunami hit the countries bordering the Indian Ocean, in which nearly 250,000 people perished and billions of dollars in property was destroyed. Studies have shown that retaining a 100-meter wide coastal buffer of mangroves can reduce the impact of tsunami waves by up to 90%. The mangroves not only reduced the force of the waves, but also blocked dangerous debris and prevented people from being carried out to the sea, a major reason that people lost their lives. Analysis of the damage in India found that communities shielded by dense mangrove forests suffered no destruction, whereas those the same distance from the sea, but without the protection of mangroves, suffered extreme loss of life and property. Without a doubt, protecting coastal forest is much less expensive than erecting dikes and seawalls. Unfortunately, mangrove forests continue to be cut down for coastal development and shrimp farming. One last example of ecosystem services I want to mention is pollination. In the U.S., 40 crops are pollinated by wild insects at an estimated value of $33 billion a year. A study in Brazil found that coffee plantations closer to forest had higher productivity because forest bees were pollinating the nearby crops. These pollination services had an estimated value greater than $100 billion per year. The high economic value of nature is increasingly clear and provides a compelling reason to protect it. However, some people criticize this instrumental, human-centered view of nature's worth and argue that nature should be protected for its own right. Only by recognizing the intrinsic value of nature will we ensure that even the tiniest, perhaps even undiscovered creatures that currently have no monetary value to us are protected. It's true that, from a practical standpoint, accepting that biodiversity has intrinsic value shifts the burden of proof from the conservationist to the developer, as this quote I'd like to read for you eloquently summarizes for us. Recognizing the intrinsic value of the non-human world has a dramatic effect upon the framework of environmental debate and decision-making. If the non-human world is only considered to be instrumentally valuable, then people are permitted to use and otherwise interfere with any aspect of it for whatever reasons they wish. If anyone objects to such interference, then the onus is clearly on the person who objects to justify why it's more useful to humans to leave that aspect of the world alone. If, however, the non-human world is considered to be intrinsically valuable, then the onus shifts to the person who wants to interfere with it to justify why they should be allowed to do so. Do you think economic arguments are sufficient for protecting the world's biodiversity? Or do all creatures, great and small, have an intrinsic right to exist? How must we value the world's forests to ensure human well-being? I hope you'll think about this and participate in this week's discussion.